up Exodus chapter 3. Remember, Exodus chapter 3 has been about God calling Moses out of the land of Midian to go back to Egypt where his people are to be able to lead them out. 2 weeks ago, we saw how the angel of Jehovah revealed himself to Moses through the burning bush. Jehovah tells Moses that he is going to personally deliver Israel from the affliction in Egypt. Jehovah has seen the oppression, their oppression, and will deliver them according to the covenant that he made with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Everything is about to unfold as from Jehovah keeping his promises that he made to Abraham 430 years earlier. And so God is appearing to Moses to let him know that Moses will be his personal spokesman to his people, the children of Israel, and also to Pharaoh. Jehovah tells Moses that he'll be successful in leading the people out and bringing them to serve Jehovah in the very mountain where God is speaking with Moses at this time. Last week we saw Moses ask Jehovah what his name he is to tell the people that he is sending Moses by. Jehovah responds with, as we see in the English, if we take a look back in verse 14, it says here in the English, I am that I am. But the Hebrew literally reads, I will be whom I will be, or I will be what I will be. This is a clear connection back to verse 12. If we take a look back there, where Jehovah tells Moses that certainly I will be with thee. So this is what God declared to Moses, that he will certainly be with him. So just like Jehovah has been with his people in the past, he will be with Moses, and he will be with the children of Israel. When Moses delivers this name, I will be whom I will be, Moses, as it states in verse 15, is supposed to connect this name to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Verse 15 says, And God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. And so here we see Moses is to connect this phrase, I am, or as we see here in the Hebrew, I will be, whom I will be, to the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So again, the message to Israel will be brought forth the connection to the covenant that was promised generations earlier. Jehovah will visit them and deliver them to the promised land according to this covenant. Everything we see in the book of Exodus is connected to and based on the covenant made earlier. So today, Jehovah gives Moses more instruction on what he is supposed to say to the children of Israel. In addition, he gives Moses an overview of how things are going to go when Israel appears with him in front of Pharaoh. Pharaoh will not be interested in letting Israel go, not letting them leave. But eventually, Pharaoh will be forced to let them go after God judges Egypt. And when Pharaoh does release them, they will leave with a great spoil. You see, the idea is that God sends his people out of Egypt with a portion of restoration, in a position of restoration. They came into Egypt with great possessions, and they will leave Egypt with great possessions, even though they're leaving as freed slaves. So let's go ahead and let's open this time up with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the book of Exodus, and I thank you for the things that we read and to learn thus far. Heavenly Father, there is so much richness in this book, things that when read over in the past in a quick manner, Father, so many things have been missed. Father, I pray that as we dig deeper into your word, this is not just a commentary on what your words have to say, but Father, the ability to understand what they mean in their context and to appreciate the rich aspect of what the message that you're communicating to your people. Father, I pray that even today as we dig into your words, that we would see truths we haven't seen before. Father, that is not our goal, is to find something new, but Father, to find truth and to latch on to it, to have a proper understanding of your words, your message, and that we can adjust our lives accordingly as well as we have a better appreciation for what you've communicated in the past and what you're still saying today. Father, I pray you bless our efforts here today, and I pray all this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right, so we're going to cover the last verses from 16 through 22 today. So let me read here verse 16 to begin with. It says, "Go and gather the elders of Israel together, and say unto them, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared unto me, saying, I have surely visited you and seen that which is done to you in Egypt." Now in verses 14 and 15, the two that precede this, Jehovah instructs Moses the name he is to reveal God by is a derivation of Jehovah. In both verses, God says this to the children of Israel. And so let me go back here and read verses 14 and 15. So God said unto Moses, "I am that I am," and he said that, "Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you." And God said moreover unto Moses, "Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations." And so we know that verses 14 and 15 are part of the general message that God wants to give to the children of Israel. And this is the children of Israel as a whole. And so we see the phrase children of Israel twice in here. So once in verse 14, you'll see the reference to children of Israel. And then you see the same thing in verse 15, the reference to children of Israel. And so God is trying to say, this is the message that I want to give to the children of Israel as a whole. Now in verse 16, Moses is given specific instruction that he is to gather the elders of Israel. So verse 16 again says, "Go and gather the elders of Israel together." And so this is like a group within the children of Israel. And he is supposed to deliver specific words to this group of individuals. This group of individuals referred to as the elders of Israel. Now when we see the term elders of Israel, the first thought is to connect this to those that were in charge with the children of Israel, over the top of them. It's kind of the idea generally we get the impression. Now a reminder that we generally see two leadership groups emerge in the Torah. We have the phrase elders of Israel, and we also have another phrase, princes of Israel or officers of Israel. These groups are distinct from one another. And so for example of this, take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 31. What I'm doing here will make sense in a moment. My goal is not to just overkill every single word here. But I think sometimes we have a tendency to just go quickly over things. But realize that typically when we see this phrase, it's like we see here in Deuteronomy 31 in verse 28. 31:28, it says, "Gather unto me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their ears, and call heaven and earth to record against them." So here you see a reference to elders, same word, and also officers. And so sometimes you'll see officers, sometimes you'll see princes. And so we have two different groups. The distinct groups are brought out here in Deuteronomy 31. And so the princes or the officers of Israel typically refer to rulers over the various tribes and family groups. This was typically an inherited position of authority. So in other words, you were born into these positions. It's almost like the idea of like kingship or something like that. And that's why the word prince typically is also used, or officer type of a thing. And so you'd have heads over family units, you'd have heads over like groups of tribes, and these would consider the officers or the princes. And so this, again, an inherited position of authority. The elders, the other group, was typically elected representatives of the people. They were individuals recognized for their maturity and wisdom in matters. So it's not like they held us like lots or they had like a formal election process, but typically these were individuals that are recognized within the communities as being wise and mature individuals among the children of Israel. And they're referred to as the elders of Israel. And so realize the two different groups. One was more elected, one was more the people's people, and one was more just they kind of inherited the position of authority. And so when we go back here to Exodus chapter 3, we come to verse 16, we see this phrase, elders of Israel. It's easy to gloss over this and just generally think this refers to the group of men that were in charge. And this is what it's referring to. So it says, "Go and gather the elders of Israel together." And so like these were like the representatives for the children of Israel. Now, the one thing that should cause us to pause is that they were an idea of servitude. It's interesting reading through all the different commentaries. They're like, well, yeah, this is kind of interesting. Consider they're slaves. They still had a government. And so I think that should cause us to pause to start with. This is the first time this phrase appears in the Torah, the elders of Israel. Now, we need to be careful we do not automatically make this connection. The first clue that we should be careful is that this is the first time we see this phrase, elders of Israel, in the Torah. And I'll come back to this in a moment. But one thing to notice and consider at this point is that it's very clear from this phrase, and even the reference to the phrase children of Israel, is that the Hebrews were still a very distinct group of people. Is that they weren't blended in with the Egyptians. They were still distinct. So Moses, when he goes back to Egypt, he is supposed to track down this specific group of people to deliver them a message. And so here we see the phrase elders of Israel. He's supposed to say to them, as we see here in the English, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared unto me, saying, I have surely visited you and seen that which is done to you in Egypt. Now, it's kind of interesting as I was looking at this in the Hebrew. The English kind of blends it together a little bit, but literally the Hebrew reads, Jehovah, the Elohim of your fathers, appeared unto me, the Elohim of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. So it's almost like the idea is that first Jehovah Elohim appeared unto God, unto Moses, and then Moses is supposed to deliver this message of the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Says this. And so the first thing Moses is to announce is that Jehovah, the same God that made the covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob, has sent me to you to deliver a message. So again, the mentioning of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is all about the covenant. It's all about the covenant. And it's amazing. I think back about the times that I used to just read the Old Testament, not have a full appreciation for the covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I would just read this as being like, well, yeah, this is the same God that your fathers had worshipped. It's almost like just more like a mentioning of this, is the same reference point. But no, this is about the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A covenant that is based on and entered into based on faith alone. You see, it all starts with Abraham. And as Abraham is commended in the New Testament and is given as an example to New Testament believers, the covenant is a covenant based on faith. This is the message, that the God of the individual Abraham that believed in God and righteousness was accounted unto him because of his faith. This is what the message is going forward. It's the God of faith, the God of the covenant. Then when you enter into the covenant based on faith. And so those are words that are spoken within much of Christianity. That connection is not emphasized. But that's what is going on here, is that whenever we have mentioned Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's like the acronym for the God, the one and only true God, the God that has a covenant that enters into by faith. So starting off this way, it's another way of saying God is here to follow through on those promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the first thing that Moses is to decree. And so the message continues. And so we read this. There's a lot of repetition here. But realize there is an emphasis going on within the text. And it's easy just to read them and say, oh, these are just words. No, they're not just words. God is making a specific point. He makes the point back in the divine narrative of Exodus chapter 2. He makes the point to Moses particularly. He makes the point to say, this is what I want you to say to the children of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now he's supposed to find a specific group within this. And he's supposed to say to them the first thing, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And so this is the first thing that's mentioned. Now he says more things. The message continues that this is the same God that has visited you and seen your situation in Egypt. Again, it's verse 16. He says, I have surely visited you and seen that which is done to you in Egypt. So God says that I've visited you and I've seen your situation. And so this is the message. And so God's trying to help them understand, I've seen what's going on. Verse 17. We're going to come back to 16 here momentarily. Verse 17. And I have said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt, and unto the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. So Moses is supposed to continue his message in saying that not only has Jehovah visited them, and not only has he seen their situation, but he has seen their situation of affliction. So not just has visited them and sees them there in Egypt, but sees their difficulty, their turmoil, their oppression. In other words, he knows exactly what they're going through. And that he is going to bring them out of this affliction. In other words, he's going to remove them from the bondage in Egypt. He's going to free them. And he's going to place them in the land of Canaan. Now we see here a number of people groups that live in the land. And so we can see the mentioning of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. And so in various contexts, sometimes we see more names, sometimes we see less names. So I've seen some individuals trying to connect the number of names that are mentioned with some sort of numerical value. I'm not sure how to fully connect that. But here it is significant to see the reference to the Jebusites. The Jebusites do not show up in all the different contexts. But what is the significance of the Jebusites? Well, they're the people group that controlled Mount Zion, where Jerusalem is located. And so for the second time, we see the reference to how God is going to deliver them to this land. It was said specifically to Moses. If you go back into verse 8, for example, we see this exact same thing. So when God appears to Moses in the burning bush, as part of this initial part of the conversation, he says in verse 8, "And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land unto a good land, and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, of the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites." The same list of names. But we also see the Jebusites listed there again. So it's like this emphasis of where they are going and what parts of the land they're ultimately going to go control. But we also see within both of these verses, the second time we see the reference to how the land is one that flows with milk and honey. And so this is all connected to a land of abundance, of prosperity, of blessing. You see, all this is the same phraseology that God used when he spoke to Moses, and he's telling Moses, "I've told this to you, and I want you to say the same thing to the children of Israel, specifically to the elders of Israel, when you go and meet with them." You see, this is the message of God. He is going to bring them back to the land, not just out of slavery, but bring them back to the land that was initially promised to Abraham. You see, all this goes back to the covenant. These are all emphasis of words. And so if all God was interested in saying, "Well, I'm the same God that your forefathers had worshipped," well, then he wouldn't go into this extra detail talking about, "Well, I'm going to free you. I'm going to bring you back to the land that was promised to Abraham." It all connects it back to the covenant. Now, it's easy to read in verses 16 and 17 and quickly just connect things that have already been revealed in the text up to this point, and not even see any nuances here. And because we see a lot of similar words, and how God says, "I'm the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." We see the same reference to the land, talking about the affliction that God has seen among the Egyptians that they're facing. So a lot of repetition in chapter 2 and moving into chapter 3. But notice how the message to the elders of Israel in verse 16 includes a different phrase that we haven't seen before. Go back to verse 16. He says here, "After Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob appeared unto me," he says, "saying, I have surely visited you and seen that which is done to you in Egypt." He has the phrase, "I have surely visited you." Now the two words in the English, "surely visited," comes from two Hebrew words, but they're actually the same Hebrew word. So it's the same Hebrew word two times. And the same Hebrew word that appears twice is the word pakad. Pakad. And it generally means visit. It has a couple different contexts related to it, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Here it's in a good context. And so one of the verbs is in the infinitive absolute form, and another is in the cal perfect form, or the simple form of the verb. And so this construction is all about emphasis denoting surely. surety, to make sure this happens. In other words, Jehovah will visit them by visiting them, is what it's kind of saying. If we were to literally read it, the visit by visiting is the idea. So God here is saying he is personally intervening to make sure his covenant moves forward. So on a high-level gloss, what is this saying? It's saying God is going to personally get involved. And this is part of the message that God is giving to Israel. But now what is interesting, though, is when we consider the last time this word pakad has been used in the Torah. And this is where word studies become very valuable. And where is the last time that this appears? Well, hold your spot here and go back to Genesis chapter 50. This is where it gets a little interesting. Take a look at Genesis chapter 50. Of course, here in Genesis chapter 50 we have the death of Jacob, we have the burial of Jacob, we have the final reconciliation between Joseph and his brethren, and we have the final admonition and oath that Joseph makes with his brethren at the end there. That's where I want you to go, at the very end. Take a look at verse 24. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. And so here we see in verses 24 and verse 25 the reference of visit. And in both cases is translated as surely visit. In both situations, in verse 24 and verse 25, we have surely visit, which is the same two Hebrew words next to each other, the word visit and the word visit again, so pakad. So just like in Exodus chapter 3, the same Hebrew verbs are doubled in the similar construction. But there's one small difference. Here, rather than a cal perfect, it's a cal imperfect. And so we have the infinitive absolute form, and then we have the cal imperfect. Now, a little bit of the Hebrew grammar here. The perfect form of the verb denotes a completed action. So it's typically used to express something that is done or being done. So if something is in the perfect form, it's something that has done in the past or is being done like right then. The imperfect denotes an incomplete action, typically used to express an action that will be done in the future. So here in Genesis 50, Joseph prophetically declares that God will visit them. He will surely visit them, the children of Israel, in the future. And so here, go back to verse 24. If I were to kind of add like a little bit of translational flavor to this, it says, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will in the future surely visit you, and bring you out of this land, in a land which he sware unto Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. So he's saying, not now, sometime in the future, after my death, God is going to visit you and bring you out of the land. And then in verse 25, and Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will in the future surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. So in other words, in the future, when God delivers you, it's going to happen. In the future, he's going to take you out of the land of Egypt. And when you do that, I need you to promise you'll take my bones with you. And so he charges them. And so the form of the verb is saying this is in the future. And so we get all that, right? Because it doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen until we get to the book of Exodus. And so again, though, we see that in this prophetic statement that Joseph makes, he connects it to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. That's not just him throwing words out. It's because it's connected to the covenant. Everything is connected to the covenant here that's going on. And so again, verse 24 and 25 in Genesis 50 has this emphasis, not just once with the visiting, but twice with the surely visiting. And so God is going to cause them to leave Egypt. Now, when we get to Exodus chapter 3, God has Moses deliver the same message to the children of Israel. Same message as what? The same message that Joseph prophetically gave the children of Israel. Moses is delivering the same message to them now. However, this time the word visit is in the cal perfect. In other words, the time of visiting to remove Israel from Egypt is no longer future. It is in the present. God is saying that Moses delivered the message. It's no longer future, it's right now. I've come to deliver you from Egypt. Jehovah has come to visit his people to deliver them out of Egypt and into the land flowing with milk and with honey. So another question becomes, who was this message delivered to? We go back to verse 16 and we see in Exodus 3, it goes to the elders of Israel. He's supposed to gather the elders of Israel together. Now the word behind elders is the word zeken, which can mean elder, and elder is a good translation. But it could also mean one that is old, one that is aged, or one that is ancient. So for example, the exact same word appears in Genesis 24. So go back to Genesis 24. Genesis 24 in verse 1. It says here in verse 1, and Abraham was old, or zeken, and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. Abraham was getting really old. He was zeken. Take a look at Genesis 27 in verse 1. Go forward a few chapters. Genesis 27 and verse 1. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old, or zeken, and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said unto him, my son. And he said unto him, behold, here am I. Take a look at Genesis 44. Genesis 44 in verse 20. Here, when the children of Jacob is talking to Joseph, who was the second in charge, the governor over Egypt, they didn't know who he was. In Genesis 44 and verse 20, and we said unto my Lord, we have a father, an old man, a zeken, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left with his mother, and his father loveth him. So here, they refer to their father Jacob as being zeken, or old. And he was old. So here, a reason why I'm going to go to 3 different spots here is a very common understanding for this word to mean someone that is old, or very old. So you see when it says, when you go back to Exodus chapter 3, that Moses was to gather the elders of Israel, I do not think it's referring to the leadership group of the Hebrew people here. I believe it's referring to the very old among the Israelites. And why would that matter? Why would Moses need to go to the ones that are very old of the Israelites? Well, why? Well, let's go back to Genesis 50 again. We took a look at verses 24 and 25. Let's just go back a verse. Go back to 2 verses, excuse me. So verse 22. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. So this is 50 years after the events of the previous verse. 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation, to the children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up on Joseph's knees. They were brought up on Joseph's knees. And so we see here, generations, the 3rd and 4th generations here connected to Ephraim and also Manasseh. Now, when we did the math in other messages, we determined that Moses was born 64 years after the death of Joseph. Moses was born 64 years after the death of Joseph. This means that we're now 144 years after the death of Joseph. That sounds like a long time, especially nowadays. If you were to see somebody that was 144 years old, you'd be going like, whoa, there's something wrong here with your birth certificate. Because you can't be that old, because you don't live that long. However, during this time, they did live longer. Abraham lived to be 175. Isaac, 180. Jacob, 147. Joseph was only 110. But that doesn't mean that everyone else here was going down and there wasn't individuals that were living longer. It's not unreasonable to understand that some of the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh that were brought up on Joseph's knees, and the ones, if you go back to Genesis 50 here again, As it says in verse 24, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I believe this includes the ones that were brought up on his knees. And in fact, I believe that's probably the ones they were pointed to. They charged them that these were the same individuals, the elders that Moses spoke directly to. These individuals that heard the words of Joseph, when Joseph said, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you up out of the land which he swore unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. This is the same individuals that heard Moses' message. If you go back to Exodus 3, and he is supposed to say, let me read verses 16 and 17. Go and gather the elders of Israel, the old of Israel, and say unto them, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared unto me, saying, I have surely visited you. The exact same words. And seen that which is done unto you in Egypt. And I have said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt, unto the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. You see, I believe he charged the individuals, Joseph did, and these same individuals who Moses found. All of them? Maybe not. I believe it's very important to see the connection between Exodus and Genesis. There's not years and years and years. There's a generation that overlaps here. And these books are much closer than we realize at first glance. And so moving on here into verse 18. So that's the message that Moses is supposed to deliver, the elders or the old of Israel. Verse 18. And they shall hearken to thy voice, and thou shalt come, thou and the elders of Israel, unto the king of Egypt, and ye shall say unto him, the Lord God of the Hebrews hath met with us, and now let us go, we beseech thee, 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice the Lord our God. Now, to carry forward the thought that we just talked about with reference to the elders of Israel being the old folks, if you want to say it that way, the senior citizens of Israel, most times individuals will read verse 18 and get the impression, well, Moses was going with the other leaders of the people. And that could be a valid understanding, but I don't think it's any less valid for Moses to go with the elders, the older people, the ones that had heard the promises of God through Joseph, and going appearing before Pharaoh, or the king of Egypt. And so here we find in verse 18, though, the very first words here, it says, and they shall hearken to thy voice. Who? The elders of Israel. The same individuals that Moses was supposed to go gather and deliver the specific message of verses 16 and 17. So after Jehovah tells Moses what to say to the gathered elders of Israel, Jehovah then tells Moses that they shall hearken to his voice. In other words, the elders of Israel will believe him, and they will support him. You see, I think this statement makes much more sense if the message was given to individuals that heard the original prophecy from Joseph. And they had been eagerly expecting this day. So they're like, well, I know Joseph. He was a man of God. He had a connection with God. And he knew what he was talking about. How was it that he said that God will visit you? Wasn't he talking to us? Didn't he say that we're going to be taken out of the land of Egypt? Things have gotten worse. They haven't gotten better. But somehow God's going to do this. And so I believe there are a number of individuals that are eagerly expecting this day that Moses would appear and deliver a similar message. And so this should have been encouraging to Moses. And I believe this is what Moses latches on to here. And so it says here, and they shall hearken to thy voice. So it should have been words of encouragement to Moses, that he's going to go back and that he can be confident that the message he delivers will be received by God's people. And God then gives Moses, in here verse 18, further instruction. He and the elders that received his message are to go to the king of Egypt. Again, consider that nowhere do we see the name of Pharaoh. All we see is reference to Pharaoh, or we see king of Egypt. All we see is this title. And so in other words, God is purposely just saying this guy. He was in charge. And so this message there delivered to the king of Egypt is that Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, that he met with us, The word met here has the idea of encounter. In other words, we had a personal revelation from God. This is what we're supposed to do. So we're not just making this up, Pharaoh. This is the message they're supposed to deliver. So again, this is what God is telling Moses is supposed to happen. So verse 18, again, and they shall hearken to thy voice, and thou shalt come, thou and the elders of Israel, unto the king of Egypt, and ye shall say unto him. So now this is the second message. So step one, Moses is supposed to go to the children of Israel and let them know that the I will be, that Jehovah, the God of their fathers, has come. And he's supposed to then find the specific elders of Israel and deliver a specific message unto them. They will receive that. And then now, after that, they're supposed to go to Pharaoh, Moses and the elders of Israel. He's supposed to deliver the message unto him, saying that the Lord God of the Hebrews hath met with us, and now let us go, we beseech thee, 3 days' journeys into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. And so they're supposed to go and give this specific message unto the king of Egypt, or Pharaoh. And so this message here is that we've met him personally. And so obviously that's through Moses delivering the message. But not only have they met with their God, and their God has revealed himself to them, but that he has told us, they're supposed to say to the king of Egypt, that God says that we're supposed to take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to sacrifice unto him. Now notice that when they refer to themselves to Pharaoh, they don't say, we the children of Israel. They refer to themselves as Hebrews. So not as Israel, but as Hebrews. So this group of people were known as Hebrews. So I want to spend a little bit of time just briefly take a little bit of a rabbit trail here. But the first person that has this title formally was Abraham. If we go back here to Genesis chapter 14. So once again, all this stuff connects us back to Abraham. So this is significant. Now for the Egyptians, they were just known as Hebrews, but realize that Abraham had the same type of thing. Genesis 14 and verse 13. So Genesis 14:13, and there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. So Abram here was a Hebrew. Abram the Hebrew. And so this name Hebrew is the Hebrew word every. And you could translate Ibri. Without the vocalization change there, but Ibri or Ebri. So you can see how you get Hebrew from that. But it comes from the name Eber, which is just a transliteration there. If you go back to Genesis chapter 10, I think this is a little bit interesting. Give you a little background on why they called Hebrews. Genesis chapter 10. Take a look at verse 22. Genesis chapter 10 and verse 22. Here we see some lineage here, some genealogy. So remember that Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Verse 22. The children of Shem, Elam, and Asher, and Arphaxad, and Lud, and Aram. And the children of Aram, Uz, and Hul, and Gether, and Mash. And Arphaxad beget Selah, and Selah beget Eber. So it'll eventually go down to Abraham. So we see here Eber. So Eber is where we get the name Hebrew from. Now what's interesting, if you just go back one verse from where we read, if you go back to verse 21, when it kind of gives like a little bit of introduction, it says, unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber. Well, Eber wasn't the direct descendant of Shem, not like the son of Shem, because you have to go through all those names in verses 22, 23, and 24 before you get to Eber. So in other words, it's like saying like these were all connected to the same kind of faith that Eber had, but Eber stood out, and Eber was known as being distinctly living for God, type of a thing. And so they're all known as Eberites or Hebrews. And what is this name connected to? Well, it's a little bit more than that. because the word Eber means to pass over or to cross over. In other words, it is the name of the people that have passed over to God. The idea is connected with conversion. So in other words, they're all the people of ones that have crossed over or passed over or converted. So one that has passed over to trusting in God is kind of the idea here. And it becomes synonymous to those that identify with the God Jehovah or El Shaddai, the God that was different from all other gods. God's people have always been distinct or different. And so that's why Abram was known as a Hebrew, one that has crossed over and has worshipped as one God that's different from everybody else, doesn't allow other gods, doesn't blend with other gods, doesn't be worshipped the same way. And so one that's crossed over. So Pharaoh may not have been familiar with Jehovah himself, but he was well aware of this distinct group of people known as the Hebrews, the ones that have crossed over into a different lifestyle. And so that's one of the things that we struggle with many times. It's like, well, I'm going to be different if I believe this kind of stuff. Yes, exactly. That's what the name kind of means. Hebrew means crossed over or passed over. And so now we can see that Jehovah, and we go back to Exodus chapter 3, is instructing Moses to tell the king of Egypt that Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, the God of this special, unique people that doesn't want to blend in with anybody else, wants to be distinct, continue to follow their ways, not the ways of the world, different. This God of these people, the Hebrews, has personally told his people that he wants them to take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to sacrifice to Jehovah. And so we get to this statement here when it says, so let's go ahead and read verse 18. It says, "Met with us, and now let us go, we beseech thee, 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord or Jehovah our God." Now the statement here is very interesting, considering how God has already told Moses that he's going to deliver Israel from Egypt. God's already told Moses this, that he's going to deliver them, take them out of Egypt and deliver them to the promised land, the land of the Canaanites. That's the message. So God's already told Moses, I'm going to make a permanent relocation of my people out of Egypt to the land of Canaan. This is also the same message that Moses was to give to the people, that they would be leaving Egypt to go to the land of Canaan. And they're going to leave. And we also know this is what ultimately ends up happening. But then we read this request here that Moses and the elders of Israel are supposed to give to the king of Egypt, that it's just a 3-day journey. That all we're doing is going to go take a 3-day journey out to sacrifice to God. And then what is implied is that they are going to return. But we know what was been promised earlier to Moses, as well as the message that Moses was to give, is that they're not going to come back. So why is it that they would give the message to Pharaoh that they just want to go 3 days out in the wilderness, sacrifice, and then imply that we're just going to come right back? Is God having Moses lie to Pharaoh? Is that what's going on here? Why not just say, God says that it is time for the Hebrews to leave Egypt and return to the land of Canaan where they came from 215 years earlier. That Pharaoh needs to free the Hebrew slaves or face the wrath of God. Seems like a pretty simple message. Why not just say that? Why give Pharaoh the impression that God wants for his people, that all he wants for his people to do is to take a short trip from Egypt to worship Jehovah? What is implied with the request of Pharaoh is that they will return. So what's going on here? Well, one explanation that I came across that I think makes a lot of sense is this. And the purpose of this request of Pharaoh was not primarily for Pharaoh. Rather, it was for Israel to learn a significant lesson. Because the message to Pharaoh was, we just want to take a 3-day short journey and go offer a sacrifice unto our God. Because the idea is that, well, Egypt just wanted to keep the Israelites because they wanted their labor. They wanted to make their slaves. They wanted to control them in the sense of just making them work for all the different building projects. And so let's take a step back and consider the bigger picture of Exodus, what's going on here. You see, the book of Exodus does a couple things. One thing is to help set the pattern and the expectation of a future dealing of God with his people. And so we've seen this sort of thing a number of occasions. And so the book of Exodus plays a role in that and helping us understand what is going to happen in the future. But the primary thing it does is that it demonstrates the spiritual concept of redemption through the physical reality of redemption. So remember, the first message that we covered here, talk about how the physical demonstrates the spiritual. You can learn the spiritual by observing the physical. And so Jehovah redeemed his people physically from slavery to transfer them to a place of physical blessing. So you have the physical slavery being released, and they can go to a place of physical blessing. This teaches the spiritual reality that God offers all people that are enslaved to sin, God offers redemption to them. He offers freedom from sin to a place of spiritual blessing. This is a reality. I don't think this takes a lot of explanation. But once you make this connection, you can see this connection. But here is a reality. It is impossible to truly serve God in any real capacity when you're enslaved to sin. You see, the truth of this request to Pharaoh is going to show to Israel is that Pharaoh is not interested in letting the Hebrews have any reasonable allowance to worship God under his watch. As long as Pharaoh's in control, he doesn't care. He wants to control everything. It's not just about Pharaoh wanting to control their work or their labor. You see, one can wrongly get that impression that all Pharaoh wanted was Hebrew labor. He just wanted them to work for him. The reality is that Pharaoh wanted to control every aspect of their life, including religious aspect. The children of Israel had no real ability to worship God as long as they were in Egypt. As long as they were under the control of Egypt, they did not have the ability to worship God as God instructs, as God demands, as God desires. Only if the Hebrews are released from Egypt will they be free to truly worship God. And so when we think about fast forwarding in the book of Exodus, you have so many people going, let's just go back to Egypt. It was so much better there. We had better food. We had things that were great. Sure, we were slaves and we had to work and we were afflicted, but it was just work. But the reality is they could not worship God unless they were free from the Egyptians. And that's what the message is being delivered here. Pharaoh, we just want to go worship God for a brief moment of time. Can you let us do that? And so this is the reality in the spiritual world as well. One that is enslaved to their sin will not be free to worship God. Do not think that you can be stuck in your sins and then think, on the other hand, you can just go ahead and just worship God how He wants to be worshiped. You see, sin is not just interested in getting you to do its work. It wants to control your entire life, and it does, including your ability to worship God, which should be your first priority in life. And so you see here, there's physical truths being taught here to help us have insight into the spiritual. See, until you have been freed from your sin, you will not be able to freely worship God and offer Him the spiritual sacrifices that He demands. You see, Israel is going to soon find out that Pharaoh is not interested in the simple request to worship God. As Pharaoh rejects this request, God will begin to judge Egypt. And the more Pharaoh resists the will of God, the more aggressive the request becomes. And so it does not just a matter of just going 3 days journey in to go worship God, to go offer a sacrifice. It gets more and more until God just says, I'm having my people go, period. So the more Pharaoh rejects, the more God asks for. Until it is a reality that God has promised. And the children of Israel's complete redemption from Egypt will be guaranteed. A redemption that will return, that there will be no more return to Egypt. And so they will go, but they will not return. And so verse 18 is a request that they're supposed to say, we want to take a 3-day journey into the wilderness with the purpose of sacrificing the Lord our God. God told Moses earlier, you guys are going to come to this mountain and worship me. And eventually they're going to go to the promised land, the land of the Canaanites, and the others that were listed. Verse 19 continues. And I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go. No, not by a mighty hand. And I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in the midst thereof. And after that, he will let you go. So here Jehovah tells Moses what is going to happen when the request is made to Pharaoh to leave for a 3-day journey in the wilderness. God says that he knows the king of Egypt will deny the request. He says, not with a strong hand. Pharaoh is not going to let you go. It doesn't matter how much you demand. It doesn't matter how much you stomp your feet. It doesn't matter how much you physically want to leave. Pharaoh will not let you go. It doesn't matter how strong your hand is. That God will have to become forceful with Pharaoh, and only after God does miracles, as our first 2 years wonders, and punishes Pharaoh, will Pharaoh let the children of Israel leave Egypt. That's what it says in verses 19 and 20. He says, and I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go. No, not by a mighty hand. And I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders, so smiting them, so hurting them with his wonders, which I will do in the midst thereof, and after that he will let you go. After that he will let you go. So these 2 verses are important to keep in mind. God tells Moses exactly what's going to happen here. Now remember how this all plays out. So we have the benefit of knowing what's going to happen in the future chapters here. Remember how it happens. Moses goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh rejects the idea of letting the Hebrews leave. But rather than just denying the request, what does Pharaoh do? Pharaoh makes the Hebrews' job of slavery, making bricks, way harder. And the people complain. And then what happens? They complain to Moses, and then Moses goes back to God and he questions God. God, what are you trying to do here? You didn't tell me when this was going to happen. But that's not the case. God said exactly what's going to happen here. There's no surprises to how all this unfolds. It's kind of like Moses focuses on the encouraging news that the elders of Israel will listen to him, and that Pharaoh would eventually let him go. You see, there's a lot packed into what God meant when he said in verse 19, and I'm sure the king of Egypt will not let you go, not by a mighty hand. Only when I, says here, and I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in the midst thereof, and after that he will let you go. 2 short verses, a lot in there. And so God says it would take him to stretch out his hand to smite Egypt. God doesn't say it's going to take 10 plagues. He just says that Pharaoh is going to be difficult, that Pharaoh is going to be stubborn. And I think we also tend to take a similar approach to Scripture. Like, for example, take a look at Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16. So let's go to the New Testament. New covenant promises. Matthew 16. We've been here for a couple other contexts. Take a look at verse 18. Matthew 16 and verse 18. Matthew 16, 18 says, and I say also unto thee, this is Yeshua speaking to his disciples, particularly Peter, who just had the confession. He says, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, or his assembly. What assembly? The one that was that had fallen down, that was talking about rebuilding with the tabernacle of David in Amos chapter 9. It says, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Well, that's nice. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. That's awesome. That means victory is assured to God's assembly of his people, right? Exactly. That's what it does mean. However, there is a promise here that the gates of hell shall not prevail. What's implied in that? Well, the gates of hell, that hell is going to be attacking the assembly. It does not say that our life will be trouble-free once we're saved. Once you put your confession and faith and trust in Yeshua, that everything's going to be great. No, it talks about hell is going to be coming attacking you. It does not say life will be trouble-free. What it is saying is there will be opposition. But in the end, God's assembly of people will be victorious. It's very easy for us today. We're going through life going, God, why is this so difficult? You didn't tell me it was going to be like this. What's going on in my life? There's challenges. There's people opposing me. There's people that are trying to get in the way of what you're trying to get accomplished here. What is going on? It's not simple. It's not easy. I think it's simple. It's the same thing that's going on for Moses here. God says, you know, Pharaoh, he's not going to let you go. It's going to be difficult for you. And only when I reached out and used my hand to smite him and show my wonders, then he'll let you go. We know how it happens here afterwards, that Moses does not focus on these words here. He goes to Israel. He goes to the elders of Israel. They receive the message, just like God says it happened. Then they end up going to Pharaoh, and it doesn't go well. In fact, it goes worse. They walk away, and they just increase the burden on the children of Israel. And so I think it's a similar type of concept. Moving on here in verse 21. So building off of after that, he will let you go. Verse 21, and I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall come to pass that when ye go, ye shall not go empty. But every woman shall borrow of her neighbor, and of her that sojourneth in her house, jewels of silver, and jewels of gold, and raiment, and ye shall put them on your sons, and upon your daughters, and ye shall spoil the Egyptians. So here we can see that God tells Moses that the children of Israel will leave, with not only their limited possessions of being slaves, but they would also take with them many material things from the Egyptians. So we see here references to silver, references to gold, and also to raiment or clothing. So much that even the children of Israel will be carrying it out on them. See, it's one thing to be able to take like jewelry or precious things as adults. It's another thing to say, hey, here, Joey, why don't you take this? Hey, Charlie, why don't you take this? Why don't you carry some of this back? Because I have too much to carry myself. So why don't you wear some of this necklace and this nice clothing, and we'll walk out together. And so this explains here that everyone is leaving, and everyone is going to come out with these additional material things, these possessions. Now, it's important to understand, because we read this word here back in verse 22. It says, but every woman shall borrow of her neighbor. So we kind of think this idea, well, this isn't very nice. Why don't you just let me use this for my 3-day journey type of thing, and I'll bring it back to you. We use the word borrow in the English to mean the idea of returning something back to someone, lending it out temporarily. But this Hebrew word behind borrow means to ask for something, or to inquire, or to request something. So in other words, that's not about, here, let me borrow this and I'll give this back to you. This is, hey, can I have that? So in other words, this presents the picture that while the Hebrews were leaving, that God says what's going to happen is that they ask their Egyptian neighbors of things they see, and the Egyptians agree to it. It's like a Hebrew will say, hey, I really like that necklace that you're wearing. Can I have it? And the Egyptians will go, sure, go ahead, have it. Just take it, get out of here. Now we know there's going to be a little more spite in that when they leave. But the idea is that the Egyptian will say, sure, but why don't you also take this bracelet on my wrist? Or, oh, by the way, maybe you need some extra clothing. Let me help give you some of that kind of stuff too. You need this for your journey. And so the idea is the Hebrews ask for this stuff, and the Egyptians are like, yes, take it, go. You can have this stuff. And so God says here in verse 21 that I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. So the Egyptians will cooperate. They'll say, yes, take this stuff. They'll ask for it. The Hebrews or children of Israel will ask for the things, and the Egyptians will give it to them. And so this presents an additional way that Jehovah is going to take care of his people. Not only is he going to free them, but he's also going to throw upon them his blessings in the form of these Egyptian goods. See, they will not leave Egypt empty-handed. And this very thing was prophesied to Abraham in Genesis 14. So again, this idea connecting it back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So go back here to Genesis chapter 15. This idea that they would leave with all this stuff is back here in Genesis 15. Let's pick it up in verse 12. Genesis 15:12. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abraham, so this would be God speaking unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And so here, so this is the confusion form of Scripture that individual connect the affliction to only being related to Egypt. So 400 years they're saying they'll be in Egypt, but they're only in Egypt for 215 years. So that's very clear when you compare, again, a reminder of what we find in Galatians chapter 3, where Paul connects the dots for us. It is very specific. So they'll be a stranger for 400 years. A stranger where? In the land of Canaan and the land of Egypt. They have nowhere that is their land. And they will be afflicted. They'll be oppressed wherever they are. They're not going to be getting along with people wherever they are. Specifically in Egypt. And it says here in verse 14, and also that nation whom they shall serve, the only place that they serve a nation is in Egypt, he says, will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance. And so here, connected to the promise, the covenant given to Abraham, the same covenant reaffirmed with Isaac, the same covenant reaffirmed and confirmed with Jacob, was spoken to Abraham. Abram, his name here in Genesis chapter 15 at this time, before God changed his name, said that I'm going to bring you out of that nation that is you're serving. And when I bring you out, you're going to come out with great substance. Well, what great substance? Well, it's the exact same thing that God is telling his people that Moses is supposed to say with the elders of Israel when they go before Pharaoh. That what will happen is that they'll not go away empty, but they're gonna have jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. And so much so they'll put them on their sons and their daughters. And so here we see that you can only imagine if you were a Hebrew slave this time and you knew what the prophecy of Genesis chapter 15 and verse 14, and I believe that they knew these prophecies, if they had the written word of God, that it wasn't that Moses just made up the history or something like that, or recorded down what some people may have known or what God revealed to Moses. I believe this was known by the Hebrews. So imagine if you knew this promise back to Abraham, how such a promise would seem such far-fetched unto a slave, that you're going to leave Egypt with an abundance of things, and how impossible this must have sounded. How in the world would God bring this about, especially to a slave? Even with a more specific statement to Moses, that it would include gold and silver and clothing or raiment. But the reality is that this will happen. Even right now, as God says this is going to happen to them, that they will leave with this substance. It seems impossible based on their current situation. But again, as I bring this to a close, consider again the connection of the physical truth to the spiritual reality. When God frees us from the bondage of sin, He does not release us to a place of spiritual void. He transfers us into the kingdom with immediate blessings. Blessings that we did not create on our own. Blessings that we did not earn, that we did not deserve. God just gives us spiritual blessings immediately. And so you can see this idea of receiving great riches upon redemption is not a new covenant idea like many Christians believe. I mean, how many times do you think, oh, the new covenant is so much greater because there's so much spiritual blessings. Who could have seen this coming? We don't do anything to earn it or deserve it. God just gives it to us. Well, this very concept is based and rooted in Genesis 14. God already said it's going to happen. He says, physically, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to you. And this is going to happen, and this pictures the spiritual reality. And so it's founded in the prophecy of Genesis 14. And the physical demonstration of it happens, or 15, and the physical demonstration of it happens in Exodus. So next week we'll move into chapter 4 of Exodus, where the dialogue between Jehovah and Moses continues at the burning bush. Moses pushes back, and we're going to see God push back on Moses. Let's go ahead and let's close in prayer.